He told everyone I was too emotional to attend. Then they opened the $2 million statement I left on the gift table. The December snow fell steadily outside the windows of the Fraternal Order of Police Lodge in downtown Detroit as I stood in the parking lot, watching through the frosted glass as my colleagues celebrated Captain Thomas Bradley's retirement party. 28 years of dedicated service to the Detroit Police Department was coming to an end, and everyone who mattered in law enforcement was inside that warm, decorated hall, sharing stories and honoring a man who had supposedly earned their respect through decades of leadership and community service. Everyone except me, that is. I had been deliberately excluded from this celebration by the guest of honor himself, who had made it very clear that my presence would be disruptive and too emotional for such an important occasion. According to Thomas, I was still too unstable and unprofessional to be trusted around his distinguished guests, too prone to making scenes that would embarrass the department and tarnish his carefully cultivated reputation as a fair and respected leader. If this story is resonating with you, please take a moment to comment below and let us know where you're watching from. Give this video a like and subscribe to our channel, because we truly help families and individuals who are going through difficult workplace situations like this. Your support helps us continue sharing these stories of resilience and justice. What Thomas didn't know, as he basked in the admiration of his peers and accepted their congratulations on his successful career, was that earlier that afternoon I had placed an envelope on the gift table containing a bank statement showing the $2 million settlement I had recently received from my lawsuit against the city for the harassment, discrimination, and retaliation I had endured under his command for the past 6 years of my career as a detective in the Special Victims Unit. My name is Detective Sarah Martinez, and for 15 years I had served the city of Detroit with distinction, earning commendations for my work with domestic violence cases and sexual assault investigations. I had built a reputation as a thorough, compassionate investigator who could handle the most sensitive cases while maintaining the professionalism and emotional strength required to seek justice for victims who had nowhere else to turn when their worlds were shattered by violence and betrayal. When Captain Bradley was assigned to oversee our unit 6 years ago, everything changed. From his first week in command, he made it clear that he viewed female detectives as liabilities rather than assets, questioning our judgment on cases, undermining our authority in front of suspects and witnesses, and consistently assigning the most important investigations to male colleagues regardless of experience or expertise in handling sensitive crimes involving women and children. The harassment began subtly with comments about my emotional reactions to particularly difficult cases, suggestions that I was too invested in victim advocacy to maintain proper investigative objectivity, and implications that my dedication to seeking justice reflected personal issues rather than professional commitment. When I reported instances of sexual assault with the thorough documentation that had become my trademark, Bradley would review my work with obvious skepticism, questioning witness credibility and suggesting that I was leading victims toward conclusions that might not reflect the actual circumstances. As months passed, Bradley's criticism became more direct and more public. During staff meetings, he would single me out for excessive emotional involvement in cases, claiming that my approach to interviewing trauma victims was unprofessional, and that my advocacy for comprehensive investigations was disruptive to department efficiency. He began reassigning my most important cases to male detectives, explaining to supervisors that I was too volatile to handle high-profile investigations that required steady leadership. The breaking point came during a case involving a prominent businessman who had been accused of sexual assault by 3 different women over a 2-year period. I had spent months building relationships with the victims, gathering evidence, and preparing a comprehensive case that clearly demonstrated a pattern of predatory behavior and showed strong prospects for successful prosecution that would protect other potential victims from similar attacks. When I presented my findings to Captain Bradley, he dismissed my work as vendetta-driven and accused me of manufacturing evidence to support preconceived conclusions about the suspect's guilt. He reassigned the case to Detective Mike Patterson, who had no experience with sexual assault investigations, and instructed him to focus on facts rather than emotions while reviewing my work for bias and procedural violations. Within 2 weeks, Patterson had concluded that the evidence was insufficient for prosecution. The charges were dropped, and the businessman returned to his position in the community with his reputation largely intact. The 3 victims were devastated by this outcome, and 2 of them specifically requested to speak with me about their disappointment with the department's handling of their cases and their loss of faith in the justice system. When I tried to arrange meetings with these victims to provide emotional support and explain the legal complexities that had led to the decision not to prosecute, Captain Bradley issued a formal reprimand stating that I was interfering with closed investigations and engaging in inappropriate contact with complainants for personal rather than professional reasons. The reprimand became part of my permanent record and was cited in subsequent performance evaluations as evidence of my inability to respect department policies and chain of command. Over the following months, Bradley's campaign against me intensified. He began scheduling mandatory overtime shifts that conflicted with my court appearances in other cases, forcing me to choose between honoring commitments to prosecutors and victims or following direct orders from my commanding officer. When I requested schedule accommodations to fulfill my legal obligations, he denied these requests and cited my inflexibility as evidence that I was not suited for the demands of detective work. The psychological impact of this sustained harassment was devastating. I began experiencing anxiety attacks before work, dreading the daily confrontations and public humiliation that had become routine parts of my job. My sleep was disrupted by worry about my cases, my career, and my ability to continue serving victims who depended on me for support and advocacy during the most vulnerable periods of their lives. My family noticed the changes in my behavior and encouraged me to seek help through the department's employee assistance program, but I was reluctant to document mental health treatment that Bradley might use as additional evidence that I was emotionally unstable and unfit for duty. The isolation and stress created a vicious cycle where Bradley's accusations about my emotional state became increasingly accurate as I struggled to cope with the hostile work environment he had created. The situation reached its nadir during a staff meeting where Bradley announced that I would be transferred to the Property Crimes Division, citing my documented inability to handle the emotional demands of victim advocacy and the need to place me in a position where my personal issues would be less likely to interfere with investigations. The transfer was presented as a lateral move, but everyone in the room understood that it represented a significant demotion and effectively ended my career as a specialist in crimes against women and children. That evening, I contacted attorney Jennifer Walsh, who specialized in employment discrimination and civil rights violations. After reviewing my documentation of Bradley's behavior and the department's failure to address my complaints through internal channels, she agreed to represent me in a federal lawsuit alleging gender discrimination, hostile work environment, and retaliation for reporting illegal and unethical conduct by my supervisor. The legal process was long and emotionally draining, requiring me to relive every humiliating encounter and document every instance of discrimination while continuing to work under Bradley's command. During depositions, city attorneys questioned my competence, my emotional stability, and my motivations for filing the lawsuit, suggesting that my complaints reflected personal failings rather than genuine violations of my civil rights. Bradley's deposition revealed the depth of his prejudice against female officers. When asked about his comments regarding my emotional reactions, he stated that women were naturally more emotional than men and therefore less suited for objective investigative work. He defended his reassignment of my cases as protecting the integrity of investigations from gender-based bias and insisted that his actions reflected professional judgment rather than discrimination. The testimony of other female officers in the department corroborated my experiences with Bradley's discriminatory behavior. Detective Lisa Chen described similar treatment, including public criticism of her emotional involvement in cases and reassignment of important investigations to male colleagues with less experience. Officer Patricia Rodriguez testified about Bradley's comments regarding women's natural limitations in law enforcement and his belief that female officers were more suited for community relations than serious police work. Medical testimony documented the severe psychological impact of the hostile work environment Bradley had created. Dr. Rachel Thompson, a psychiatrist specializing in workplace trauma, explained how sustained harassment and discrimination could cause symptoms that paradoxically seem to validate the discriminatory behavior, creating a destructive cycle where victims appeared to confirm their harassers' accusations about their emotional instability and professional inadequacy. The city's defense strategy involved attacking my character and competence, while portraying Bradley as a dedicated professional who had made difficult but necessary personnel decisions based on legitimate performance concerns. They presented evidence of my emotional responses to particularly disturbing cases as proof that I was unsuited for detective work, arguing that Bradley's actions reflected proper management rather than gender discrimination. However, the jury was ultimately convinced by the pattern of discriminatory behavior, the testimony of multiple witnesses, and the clear evidence that Bradley had treated female officers differently from their male counterparts in similar situations. After 3 days of deliberation, they returned a verdict in my favor, awarding $2 million in compensatory and punitive damages that reflected both my lost career opportunities and the severity of the department's civil rights violations. The settlement negotiations that followed were complex and contentious, with the city initially refusing to accept the jury's decision and threatening to appeal. However, their legal team eventually recognized that the evidence was overwhelming and that an appeal would likely result in even higher damages, particularly given the publicity surrounding the case and the public attention focused on police department's treatment of female officers. The final settlement agreement included not only the monetary award but also provisions requiring the department to implement comprehensive anti-discrimination training, establish independent oversight of personnel decisions affecting female officers, and create clear procedures for investigating complaints of harassment and retaliation. Bradley was required to undergo sensitivity training and was placed under administrative review for the remainder of his service. As Bradley's retirement party approached, I struggled with conflicting emotions about his departure from the department. Part of me felt vindicated by his forced retirement under a cloud of controversy and legal sanctions, but another part regretted that our conflict had become so public and divisive within the law enforcement community that had been my professional home for 15 years. The decision to leave the bank statement at his retirement party was not made impulsively or vindicatively, but rather as a statement about accountability and justice. I wanted Bradley and the colleagues who had supported his discriminatory behavior to understand that actions have consequences and that victims of harassment and discrimination have legal rights that cannot be ignored or dismissed through intimidation and retaliation. On the evening of the party, I drove to the lodge and watched through the windows as my former colleagues celebrated Bradley's career while pretending that the lawsuit and settlement had never happened. The cognitive dissonance was remarkable. These supposedly dedicated law enforcement professionals were honoring a man who had been found liable for civil rights violations, as if his legal troubles were merely personal disputes rather than serious professional misconduct. I placed the envelope containing the settlement statement on the gift table, where it would be discovered among the congratulatory cards and retirement presents. The statement clearly showed the $2 million amount and included a brief note explaining that this was the price the city had paid for Bradley's discriminatory behavior and the department's failure to address civil rights violations within its own ranks. The reaction inside the party was swift and dramatic. According to colleagues who later described the scene, Bradley's face went white when he opened the envelope and read the settlement statement. The room gradually fell silent as people realized what the document represented and began to understand the full extent of the legal consequences that had resulted from his treatment of female officers. Several attendees later told me that Bradley attempted to dismiss the settlement as a frivolous lawsuit that had been resolved simply to avoid litigation costs. But his explanations rang hollow among people who knew the details of the case and had witnessed his discriminatory behavior firsthand. The celebration continued, but with a subdued atmosphere as people processed the implications of what they had learned about their honored guest. Word of the incident spread quickly through the Detroit Police Department, and within days I was receiving calls from colleagues who expressed support for my actions and regret that they had not been more vocal in challenging Bradley's behavior while it was occurring. Several female officers reached out to thank me for taking legal action that had resulted in policy changes and training programs that would benefit future generations of women in law enforcement. The publicity surrounding the settlement and the retirement party incident led to broader conversations about gender discrimination within police departments nationwide. I was invited to speak at conferences and training programs, sharing my experiences and advocating for stronger protections against harassment and retaliation in law enforcement agencies across the country. Captain Bradley completed his retirement and moved to Florida, where he reportedly struggles with the reputation that followed him from Detroit. His discriminatory behavior had not only cost the city $2 million, but had also permanently tarnished his legacy and raised questions about the integrity of his entire career in law enforcement. Meanwhile, I was promoted to lieutenant and assigned to develop new protocols for investigating gender-based crimes and supporting officers who report discrimination and harassment. The work has been challenging but fulfilling, allowing me to transform my negative experiences into positive changes that protect other women in law enforcement from similar treatment. The $2 million settlement has provided financial security that allows me to focus on advocacy work and policy development without worrying about career advancement or political considerations. I have used part of the money to establish a legal defense fund for female officers facing discrimination, ensuring that financial constraints don't prevent women from seeking justice when their civil rights are violated. 3 years after Bradley's retirement party, I was honored with the Detroit Police Department's Distinguished Service Award for my contributions to improving workplace equity and supporting victims of gender-based crimes. The ceremony was attended by hundreds of officers, including many who had initially supported Bradley but had come to recognize the importance of addressing discrimination and creating inclusive work environments. In my acceptance speech, I reflected on the journey from victim to advocate, acknowledging that while the harassment and discrimination I experienced had been painful and damaging, the legal victory and policy changes that resulted had created opportunities to make lasting improvements in law enforcement culture and practice. Today, the Detroit Police Department has comprehensive anti-discrimination policies, mandatory sensitivity training, and independent oversight mechanisms that help prevent the type of harassment I experienced under Bradley's command. Female officers report improved working conditions and greater confidence in the department's commitment to equal treatment and professional development opportunities. The man who called me too emotional to attend his retirement party never understood that his discriminatory behavior would ultimately cost him his reputation, his legacy, and the respect of his colleagues. The $2 million settlement statement I left on his gift table represented not just financial compensation but also accountability, justice, and the power of legal remedies to address civil rights violations that might otherwise go unpunished. My story has become one of resilience and transformation, showing that victims of discrimination can fight back through legal channels and create positive changes that benefit entire communities. The harassment that nearly ended my career ultimately became the catalyst for reforms that have improved conditions for countless women in law enforcement, proving that sometimes the most important victories come from the most difficult battles. The emotional strength that Bradley dismissed as a weakness became the foundation for advocacy work that has touched lives across the country. The excessive emotional involvement he criticized as unprofessional has driven policy changes and training programs that better serve victims of gender-based crimes and create more supportive work environments for female officers. The ripple effects of my legal victory extended far beyond the Detroit Police Department, influencing policy discussions and training programs in law enforcement agencies across Michigan and neighboring states. Universities began inviting me to speak in their criminal justice programs, where I shared my experiences with future police officers and emphasized the importance of creating inclusive work environments that value diversity and respect the contributions of all officers regardless of gender, race, or background. During one particularly memorable speaking engagement at Wayne State University, a young woman approached me after my presentation to share her own story of considering a career in law enforcement but worrying about the challenges she might face as a female officer in a male-dominated profession. Her concerns were valid and reflected the ongoing cultural barriers that discouraged many qualified women from pursuing careers in police work, despite the clear benefits that diverse perspectives bring to law enforcement operations. I spent nearly an hour with that student, discussing both the realistic challenges she would likely encounter and the significant progress that had been made in recent years to address discrimination and create better support systems for female officers. By the end of our conversation, she had decided to continue pursuing her criminal justice degree with renewed confidence that she could make a meaningful contribution to law enforcement while advocating for continued improvements in workplace culture and professional development opportunities. The legal defense fund I established with part of my settlement money has grown significantly through donations from officers, attorneys, and community supporters who recognize the importance of providing financial resources to women facing workplace discrimination. To date, the fund has supported 12 different cases across 6 states, helping female officers pursue legal remedies for harassment, retaliation, and discriminatory treatment that might otherwise have gone unchallenged due to financial constraints or fear of professional retaliation. One of the most impactful cases supported by the fund involved Officer Maria Gonzalez from Grand Rapids, whose commanding officer had consistently passed her over for specialized training opportunities while making inappropriate comments about her appearance and questioning her commitment to the job based on her plans to start a family. The legal action resulted in a substantial settlement and policy changes that established clear criteria for training assignments and prohibited personnel decisions based on officers' personal lives or family planning choices. The success of these legal challenges has created a deterrent effect within law enforcement agencies, as commanders and supervisors recognize that discriminatory behavior carries real financial and professional consequences. Several police chiefs have reached out to me for consultation on developing prevention programs and early intervention strategies that address problematic behavior before it escalates to the level requiring legal action, showing a genuine commitment to creating healthier work environments proactively rather than reactively. My relationship with the Detroit Police Department has evolved significantly since the lawsuit and settlement, transforming from adversarial to collaborative as new leadership has embraced the opportunity to become a model for progressive policing and workplace equity. Commissioner Angela Thompson, who was appointed 2 years ago, has made gender equity and workplace culture priority issues, implementing comprehensive reforms that go far beyond the minimum requirements established in my settlement agreement. Under Commissioner Thompson's leadership, the department has achieved remarkable improvements in recruitment and retention of female officers, with women now representing 35% of new hires compared to just 18% before the policy changes were implemented. Exit interview data shows dramatic reductions in workplace harassment complaints and significant improvements in job satisfaction among female officers, indicating that the cultural transformation has created lasting positive changes rather than merely superficial compliance with legal requirements. The mentorship program I developed connects experienced female officers with newcomers to the profession, providing guidance, support, and advocacy during the crucial early years when many women decide whether to continue their law enforcement careers or seek opportunities in other fields. The program has been so successful that it has been replicated in over 20 police departments across the Midwest, creating a network of support that helps women navigate challenges and advance their careers in law enforcement. Perhaps most gratifying has been the feedback I've received from crime victims who have worked with officers trained under the new protocols and sensitivity programs that emerged from my experiences with Captain Bradley. These victims report feeling more respected, better supported, and more confident in the justice system's ability to handle their cases with appropriate seriousness and professionalism, demonstrating that improving workplace culture for officers ultimately benefits the communities they serve. If this story has moved you, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Please let us know where you're watching from and share your reflections on workplace discrimination and the importance of standing up for civil rights. Your engagement helps us continue creating content that shines a light on these important issues and supports people facing similar challenges. When you like, comment, and subscribe, you're not just supporting our channel. You're joining a community of people who believe in justice, equality, and the power of speaking truth to power. Together, we can create awareness about discrimination in all its forms and encourage others to seek help when their rights are violated. Your support enables us to keep sharing these stories of courage and resilience, showing that even in the face of powerful opposition, individuals can fight for justice and create positive change. Thank you for being part of this community and for helping us amplify voices that need to be heard.